welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking into a really perplexing case, a true mystery, actually.
Yeah, one that happened down in Melbourne, Australia, in a, modern high-rise apartment building.
It's the story of Phoebe Handsjuk. She was only 24 years old. Sources describe her as vibrant, loved, getting ready for her father's birthday dinner that night.
But the day before things went tragically wrong, she sent this deeply unsettling text message. You shared the sources on this.
Right, to her family and her boss, mentioning going to hospital
Hmm.
and feeling like she was going to transform.
Exactly. And that immediately, set off alarm bells. Her mother, Natalie, her grandmother, Jeanette, they were very concerned, started calling to check in.
And initially, her boyfriend, Anthony Hampel, he told Jeanette
What?
that she was okay.
He apparently reassured her that Phoebe was just sleeping peacefully in the apartment. That's what the sources state.
Okay, so let's set the date. This is December 2nd, 2010. Phoebe, born May 9, 1986, so yeah, just 24.
And the sources note she was living with Anthony Hampel, her boyfriend, and she had been struggling, apparently, with depression and was on medication.
Including zolpidem, which some people know as Stilnox, a pretty strong sedative.
Right. So on that day, December 2nd, Phoebe's father, Len, calls Anthony. He's just trying to confirm the plans for his birthday dinner that evening.
And Anthony tells him Phoebe isn't there in the apartment.
Yeah, which was strange because her bag and her keys were apparently still in the apartment.
So Len, obviously worried, suggests reporting her missing straight away.
And Anthony was apparently hesitant. Sources mention him bringing up that, that common misconception about needing to wait 48 hours, which isn't actually true for someone potentially at risk.
Then things take a much darker turn later that evening. Between about 7:04 and 7:11 p.m., the building's concierge finds something horrific.
A body in the basement-level refuse compactor room.
And when the police arrive and inform Anthony Hampel that a body's been found, what was his reaction, according to the sources?
Well, the sources describe him saying something like, "Oh, no, my girlfriend is missing. Could it be her?"
Okay.
He told police he'd been at work all day, apparently called her every couple of hours on the landline because her mobile was broken. He mentioned her depression, the medication.
Said she often just showed up on her own and left Post-it notes.
Yeah, that's what the reports say he told them initially. But sources do note that building swipe records showed he actually arrived home earlier than he initially suggested.
And the scene inside the apartment on level 12, what did police find there?
They found a broken glass on the floor, some blood nearby, those Post-it notes, and her dog was there.
And outside the apartment, in the refuse room on that same floor where the garbage chute entrance is.
More blood on the floor and a spot of blood on the door handle leading into that small room.
What's really striking looking through this material is how fast a conclusion seems to have been reached, almost immediately.
Yeah, it's quite concerning. Sources state that very early on, one of the first police officers told the building manager and the concierge, a woman named Beth, basically not to worry, saying the girl had committed suicide and put herself down the rubbish chute.
Just like that.
Yeah.
Declared a suicide.
Pretty much, yeah. And that initial assumption seems to have really shaped everything that followed.
Because the final official ruling from Coroner White wasn't suicide, but accidental death.
Right. The coroner found that Phoebe climbed into that 12th floor garbage chute, but crucially, she did it while heavily intoxicated.
Her blood alcohol was 0.160%.
Yeah, over 3 times the legal driving limit. And she'd also taken that zolpidem, the Stilnox. So the finding was she was in a confused, disoriented, maybe even a sleepwalking state.
And the coroner concluded she somehow climbed down the chute, or at least slowed her fall.
That was the conclusion, yes. That she somehow retarded her fall down this vertical shaft.
Okay, but this is where, digging into the sources you provided, the official story starts to, well, it starts to fray, doesn't it?
It really does. Let's just picture this chute for a second. It's a vertical pipe, essentially. Only 530 millimeters across. That's what, less than 2 feet?
Tiny. And the opening, the hatch you'd have to get into, is a meter off the ground.
Yeah.
About 3 feet.
Exactly. It's not an easy thing to access. And this is where those reenactments mentioned in the sources are just so critical.
They got women of similar size and build to Phoebe to try and replicate getting into the chute.
Yes. Sober, fit young women. And even they found it extremely difficult. The sources say great difficulty just getting seated on the ledge, let alone maneuvering their bodies into the chute feet first.
They were struggling. Hands and feet everywhere. Needed help.
That's what the video reportedly shows, a real struggle. Now contrast that with Phoebe's condition, heavily intoxicated with alcohol and a sedative. How likely is it she could perform that maneuver?
Especially without leaving any marks. That's the next really baffling part, isn't it?
It is, because despite the struggle you'd expect, and the fact she was bleeding from a cut somewhere, the sources state there was very little marking of any kind on the chute hatch or the surrounding area.
No readable fingerprints, no blood on these stainless steel surfaces.
None reported, which seems almost impossible if someone, especially someone impaired, was desperately trying to get purchase to climb in.
And that lack of marks, or even significant dirt, also seems to contradict the idea she climbed down or braced herself, right?
Absolutely. The inside of the shaft was apparently very dirty, yet sources say Phoebe's body had relatively little dirt on it. Her clothes weren't really disturbed. Her singlet top hadn't ridden up, for example.
Which you might expect if she slid down.
Or even fell freely. And think about it, if you go in feet first, your arms are likely up above your head. How do you brace yourself then? How do you slow down?
Okay, so the mechanics of getting into the chute and the hall itself raise huge questions. What about her injuries?
Well, some injuries definitely fit the fall scenario. The sources detail a horrific injury to her right foot, almost severed, which was attributed to the compactor machine at the bottom.
Right.
And she had a fractured upper left femur, the thigh bone, and extensive bruising on her buttocks. Those seem consistent with landing hard after a long fall.
Okay, so those match the official narrative.
Yeah.
But there were other injuries, weren't there? Head injuries.
Yes, and this is crucial. Sources point to unexplained injuries. A 1 centimeter abrasion, like a scrape, and bruising on the right side of her jawbone.
Okay.
And significantly, a subdural hemorrhage that's bleeding on the surface of the brain over the upper left side of her brain, plus an abrasion near that above her left ear.
A subdural hemorrhage.
Yeah.
That's serious. That could cause unconsciousness.
Absolutely. And these head injuries, well, they just don't seem likely from a simple feet-first fall down a smooth, narrow shaft. How do you hit your jaw on the opposite side of your head like that?
The pathologist, Dr. Lynch, what did he say about the subdural hemorrhage?
He noted it could cause unconsciousness. And he only speculated, using a question mark in his report apparently, that it could possibly be an artifact from the autopsy process itself. He wasn't certain.
But the coroner, he presented it differently.
Yes. Sources are quite critical here. They state Coroner White asserted definitively that the hemorrhage was caused during the autopsy, essentially dismissing the pathologist's own noted uncertainty.
Wow. And what's the significance of those specific head injuries, the jaw bruise on the right, the impact on the left?
Well, some analysis within the sources suggests that specific combination is actually consistent with her being struck on the right side of the jaw with sufficient force to knock the left side of her head against a solid object such as a wall.
Like an assault.
That's what the pattern suggests as a possibility, especially given her level of intoxication. A blow like that could easily have incapacitated her.
Okay, let's go back to the scene in the apartment for a moment. The broken glass and the blood. The coroner's explanation was?
He concluded that Phoebe simply dropped a glass, cut herself on it, and that explained the blood found inside the apartment near the glass, and also the blood in the refuse room.
But the sources you shared challenged that interpretation quite strongly.
They do. They point out there's actually nothing in the evidence to prove she dropped it. It could have been knocked over, maybe even thrown.
And crucially, no blood found on the broken glass itself.
Correct. Blood was found elsewhere on a computer mouse, a mouse pad, the door architrave, which was confirmed as Phoebe's blood. But the link between that blood and cutting herself on that specific broken glass is presented in the sources as pure speculation by the coroner, not based on solid evidence.
And there's another detail about glasses, wasn't there?
Yes. 2 intact glasses were found in the apartment, which, raises the obvious question, was someone else there?
A point the coroner didn't really pursue.
Apparently not. Sources note 1 glass supposedly contained vodka residue, though they also question this, as vodka is odorless. But critically, neither of those intact glasses nor the broken fragments were ever fingerprinted.
Another missed opportunity, potentially.
Seems like it. And then there's the rubbish bag. The coroner speculated Phoebe carried a bag of rubbish out to the chute.
But again, no real evidence for that.
Sources say no evidence to support it. No glass fragments matching the broken one in the apartment were found in the bag retrieved from the compactor room downstairs. And they couldn't even definitively say that bag came from Phoebe's apartment.
And other bins weren't checked.
3 other bins inside the apartment were apparently never searched. More potential evidence just left unexamined.
And there's that detail, often mentioned in commentaries sourced online and elsewhere, about her jeans.
Yes, that her jeans were reportedly found down around her knees when her body was discovered, which, again, seems completely inconsistent with someone consciously trying to climb into or down that chute. It suggests, well, it suggests incapacitation, doesn't it?
It really does. Yeah. So we have inconsistencies with the physical evidence, the injuries, but the sources also point to major problems with the initial police investigation itself.
Yes, absolutely. Failures that potentially lost crucial evidence right from the start.
Like the CCTV footage.
A huge one. The building manager apparently warned police specifically that the system recorded on a loop and they needed to download the footage quickly before it was overwritten.
But they didn't.
Sources state the police didn't really respond and essentially left it to the building management. By the time it was looked at, much of the potentially relevant footage showing who came and went from the apartment or the refuse room was gone. Lost forever.
And electronic devices, computers, phones.
Similar issue. Police didn't seize the apartment computers on the night Phoebe died. Later, when her family got access to her laptop, sources claim all her outgoing emails had been deleted. Her Nokia phone was never found. And there's that conflicting story about her iPhone. Anthony Hampel reportedly said he'd taken it for repair, but her iPhone charger was found in her bag.
Suggesting she planned to take a working phone somewhere.
It certainly raises that possibility, conflicting with his statement as reported in the sources.
Perhaps one of the most disturbing procedural issues raised in the material relates to medical examination.
Yes. The first police officers at the scene actually prevented the ambulance paramedics from entering the compactor room to examine Phoebe. They declared it a crime scene.
So she wasn't medically checked at all.
Not for over 9 hours, not until she arrived at the hospital morgue at 4:35 the next morning.
But Coroner White concluded she was clearly deceased when found.
He did? But sources strongly challenge this. They cite the pathologist, Dr. Lynch again, who apparently said, the only acid test for death is finding a pulse, and you can't be sure without a physical exam.
Which didn't happen.
Which didn't happen. And remember, Phoebe survived the fall. She was found alive, having crawled around in that pitch-black compactor room. Sources argue it's entirely possible, maybe even likely, she was comatose but not actually dead when the concierge found her.
And the police sergeant on scene wasn't qualified to make that determination.
Absolutely not. That requires a medical professional.
So add that to the unexamined bloodstain on the wall, the unfingerprinted glasses, the unsearched bins. It's a pattern.
It is. And one more detail from the sources, apparently there was a fire alarm earlier that day, and during that time, the building's buzz-up entry recording system was turned off for about 20 minutes.
Meaning someone could have potentially entered the building undetected during that window.
It's another gap, another possibility that wasn't definitively ruled out.
Okay. So when you step back and look at all these pieces together from the sources, the extreme difficulty of getting into that chute, especially impaired, the lack of physical evidence like fingerprints or dirt that should have been there,
Right.
the unexplained head injuries
Right.
consistent with a blow, the position of her clothing, and then all these investigative failures, the lost CCTV, the delayed seizures, preventing medical checks.
It really paints a different picture, doesn't it?
It does. The sources collectively argue very strongly that the official finding that Phoebe climbed in herself while drunk or sleepwalking is just extremely improbable. It doesn't seem justified by the actual evidence.
So if that official explanation seems unlikely, what alternative does the pattern of evidence suggest?
Well, it leads you to seriously consider the possibility that Phoebe was already incapacitated, either by the alcohol and drugs or by a physical blow, like the head injuries might suggest, or maybe both.
And then
she was placed in the chute by someone else. The sources even mentioned those reenactments again.
showing it was relatively easy to put an unconscious person in.
Exactly. They reportedly showed it was quite easy for a reasonably strong male to carry a young woman of Phoebe's size and weight in an unconscious state over his shoulder and put her feet first into the chute.
Now, it's crucial to state, as the sources do, there's no smoking gun, no definitive proof of a third party being involved.
Right. No absolute proof. But to the sources also stress there's no evidence positively precluding it either. And the flaws in the investigation are a big reason for that uncertainty.
The material also directs attention towards Anthony Hampel, doesn't it? Without making direct accusations, it raises questions.
It does. It notes his arrival home nearly an hour before Phoebe was found, potentially earlier than he first stated. It questions the solidity of his computer use as an alibi the analyst couldn't confirm continuous use.
There are also mentions in the sources of inconsistencies in his statements to police over time, and forensic evidence found in the apartment that some experts cited in the sources felt was consistent with a physical altercation having occurred.
And then there's that deeply disturbing detail highlighted in the material provided about what happened years later.
Yes. Anthony Happel's subsequent girlfriend also died by self-inflicted asphyxiation after they had broken up. Her death was also ruled a suicide by a coroner.
And the sources explicitly describe this as an eerily similar case to Phoebe's.
Again, we're reporting what's in the source material. It highlights this coincidence, this parallel, without stating definitively he was involved in the second death, but drawing attention to the disturbing similarity in the context of Phoebe's unresolved case.
So wrapping this up, the core question remains profoundly unanswered, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Was this, as the official finding states, a bizarre, tragic accident fueled by intoxication and disorientation?
Or do all these inconsistencies we've discussed, the physical implausibility, the injuries that don't quite fit, the questionable scene evidence, the major investigative gaps point towards something far more sinister?
A scenario where Phoebe wasn't alone, where she didn't enter that chute of her own free will.
And the impact of this uncertainty on her family?
Mm-mm.
The sources make it clear it's been devastating.
Unimaginable. They've fought tirelessly, challenging the findings, pushing for a better investigation, just seeking truth and closure that they haven't found.
So, for you listening, considering everything we've laid out from these sources, the physics of the chute, the missing fingerprints, the unexplained head trauma, the lost evidence, does that official conclusion of an accidental, self-induced fall really hold water?
Or does the truth about what really happened to Phoebe Handsjuk remain hidden, locked away somewhere within the story of that night, obscured perhaps by an investigation that failed to uncover it?